How much chaos can one woman unleash? How many hearts can a queen break? And how many enemies can she make before the whispers turn to shouts of hatred? From the ancient courts of Merovingian France to the tumultuous battlefields of the Wars of the Roses, women who wore crowns often found themselves not adored, but reviled. For 1,000 years, from roughly 500 AD to 1500 AD, these powerful figures navigated treacherous waters, and some left a trail of resentment so deep it echoes through history. Get ready to uncover the stories of the 8 medieval queens who became the most hated figures of their age. Number 1. Margaret of Anjou. The English court, already a viper's nest of ambition and paranoia in the mid-15th century, found itself under the shadow of a queen who refused to be merely a consort. Margaret of Anjou, arriving in England as the bride of King Henry VI, stepped into a kingdom teetering on the edge of civil war. Her husband, known more for his piety in periods of mental fragility than for strong leadership, was a stark contrast to his new queen. Margaret, born in 1430, possessed a formidable intellect and an unyielding will, traits that would initially be seen as strengths but quickly became sources of bitter animosity. From the very beginning, Margaret faced an uphill battle. Her marriage to Henry VI was deeply unpopular, not least because it involved the surrender of English territories in France, a humiliating concession after generations of warfare. The English people, especially those who had fought and lost family in the 100 Years' War, saw her as the symbol of their nation's decline and a foreign interloper. She brought no dowry of land or wealth, only a tenuous peace that many resented. This initial antipathy set the stage for years of escalating hatred. As Henry VI, mental health deteriorated, Margaret found herself thrust into the role of de facto ruler. Her husband's recurring bouts of catatonia and his gentle, unworldly nature meant that the reins of power often slipped from his grasp, and Margaret was always there to seize them. This immediate assumption of authority, a role rarely welcomed in a queen, particularly by the male nobility, fueled the flames of discontent. She began to oversee the government, appoint ministers, and make crucial decisions, effectively sidelining the king's traditional advisors and family members. Her actions were seen as a usurpation of male power and an unchristian manipulation of her ailing husband. The birth of her son, Prince Edward, in 1453, did little to soothe fears and much to ignite new ones. King's severe mental breakdown shortly before the birth led many, particularly the powerful Richard, Duke of York, to question the prince's legitimacy. Whispers circulated through the court that the child was not Henry's but the product of an affair. These rumors, though never proven, served to further isolate Margaret and solidify the perception of her as a deceitful and untrustworthy foreign woman. The Duke of York, who had a strong claim to the throne himself, saw the prince's birth and Margaret's increasing influence as a direct threat to his own ambitions. As the Wars of the Roses erupted, Margaret of Anjou became the fierce and unwavering leader of the Lancastrian cause. When her husband was captured by the Yorkists and later restored to the throne only to be captured again, Margaret took up arms herself. She personally led armies, rode alongside her troops, and made tactical decisions on the battlefield. This was an unprecedented role for a queen in England, and while some Lancastrian supporters admired her resolve, it only intensified the hatred from the Yorkist faction. They painted her as a bloodthirsty, unwomanly tyrant, an image that found fertile ground among a population already wary of her foreign origins and her assertive nature. Her ferocity was particularly evident after the Battle of Wakefield in 1460, where Richard, Duke of York, was killed. Margaret, rather than showing clemency, is said to have displayed his head on the walls of York, adorned with a paper crown, a chilling act of revenge that cemented her reputation to submissiveness. Chroniclers of the time, predominantly writing from a Yorkist perspective, exaggerated these actions, depicting her as a cruel and merciless figure, a she-wolf driven by ambition and vengeance. Stories spread of her ordering the execution of Yorkist prisoners without trial, and her willingness to allow her victorious armies to plunder and pillage the southern counties. These acts, though possibly exaggerated, terrified the populace and fueled a deep fear of her retribution. Queen's determination to secure the throne for her son, even at the cost of countless lives, led her to make decisions that were often unpopular and brutal. Her reliance on a small circle of advisors, many of whom were also deeply unpopular, further alienated the wider nobility. Her efforts to raise funds for her armies, often through heavy taxation and confiscations, impacted commoners and nobles alike, leading to widespread grievances. She was seen as someone who placed personal power and her son's claim above the stability and welfare of the kingdom. When Edward IV, the Yorkist king, finally secured the throne, Margaret fled to France, but her resolve remained unbroken. For years, she tirelessly sought aid and allies, even forging an unlikely and politically scandalous alliance with her former bitter enemy, Richard Neville, the Earl of Warwick, to restore her husband and son to power. This alliance, made in the pursuit of power, further solidified her image as a manipulative and unprincipled schemer in the eyes of many. Her tenacity, which in a king might be celebrated as courage, was often interpreted in a queen as dangerous, unwomanly ambition. Her final defeat came at the Battle of Tewkesbury in 1471, where her son, Prince Edward, was killed. Margaret was captured, and her cause was irretrievably lost. She was held prisoner for years before being ransomed by the French king. By the time of her death in 1482, Margaret of Anjou was remembered by many in England not as a tragic queen defending her family, but as a ruthless, vengeful woman who plunged England into a devastating civil war. Her strength, which might have been admired in another era, became the very reason for the deep and enduring hatred she inspired in her own. Her refusal to conform to the passive role expected of a queen, and her active, aggressive pursuit of power made her a symbol of everything that was feared and reviled in a female ruler during that tumultuous period. Number 2. Joanna I of Naples. The story of Joanna, the first Queen of Naples, is a tapestry woven with political intrigue, violent death, and accusations that haunted her throughout her long and tumultuous reign. Born in 1326, Joanna inherited a kingdom fraught with internal divisions and external pressures. Naples, a powerful and strategically important realm in southern Italy, was a prize coveted by many, and Joanna's life became a constant struggle to retain her throne against ambitious relatives. Her initial marriage, arranged for political expediency, would set the stage for the defining scandal of her life and the deep hatred she would face. Joanna's first husband was Andrew, Duke of Calabria, a Hungarian prince and her first cousin. The marriage was deeply unpopular in Naples, as Andrew's Hungarian entourage attempted to assert control over the Neapolitan court, sidelining the local nobility. Andrew himself was portrayed as coarse and demanding, constantly vying for greater power, including a full coronation as King of Naples, a move that would diminish Joanna's own authority. Tension between the young royal couple and their respective factions escalated dramatically. In the early morning hours of September 18, 1345, tragedy struck. Andrew was found dead, his body hanging from a balcony outside his bedroom at Avarsa near Naples. The official story claimed he'd been strangled, then thrown from the window by conspirators. Instantly, suspicion fell upon Joanna. The young queen, barely 19 years old, was the primary beneficiary of Andrew's death, as it removed the only person who stood between her and sole rule of the kingdom. Whispers, then shouts of her complicity in the murder spread like wildfire through Naples and beyond. Andrew's brother, Louis I of Hungary, a powerful and ambitious monarch, immediately accused Joanna of regicide and fratricide. He vowed revenge and embarked on a series of invasions of Naples, famously bearing a black flag emblazoned with Anju's image, calling himself the Avenger. This direct accusation from such a powerful figure gave immense weight to the rumors of Joanna's guilt. Chroniclers of the time, many biased by their political allegiances, painted a damning picture. Some described her as a cold, calculating woman, others as a pawn of her ambitious courtiers and lovers. The details of Anju's murder were murky, and Joanna consistently denied involvement. She even submitted to a formal inquiry by the papal court, presided over by Clement VI in Avignon in 1348. During this trial, Joanna presented her case eloquently, arguing that she was innocent and the victim of a political conspiracy. While she was ultimately acquitted by the Pope, who had his own political reasons for supporting her, the acquittal did little to silence her accusers, or wash away the stain of suspicion in the eyes of many. The accusation of husband murder, a heinous crime, cemented a deep-seated hatred for her, particularly among those who believed she had escaped justice through papal favoritism. Her multiple subsequent marriages also drew criticism and suspicion. Joanna married 3 more times after Anju's death, each union fraught with political implications and sometimes scandal. Her second marriage to Louis of Taranto, another cousin, was seen by some as a desperate attempt to consolidate power and gain a protector, further fueling the idea that she was driven by ambition. Her relationships with her various husbands and her male advisors were often scrutinized and portrayed in a negative light, particularly by her enemies, who sought to undermine her authority through accusations of immorality and excessive female influence. The political landscape of Naples was constantly shifting, and Joanna found herself battling not only foreign invaders, but also rebellious barons and ambitious relatives within her own kingdom. She was excommunicated multiple times during her reign, often for political reasons related to her alliances with various popes and anti-popes during the Western Schism. These excommunications, while not necessarily condemning her character, certainly alienated devout subjects and gave her enemies powerful spiritual leverage against her. She was seen by some as a godless ruler, unwilling to bow to papal authority. Her reign was marked by constant warfare, heavy taxation, and periods of severe instability, all of which contributed to the resentment of her subjects. The frequent invasions by the Hungarians, the constant need for money to fund her armies, and the internal strife amongst the Neapolitan nobility made life difficult for the common people. While these were often consequences of the political realities of the time, the people often laid the blame at the feet of their queen, especially given the enduring cloud of suspicion surrounding Anju's death. She was perceived as a ruler whose personal life and political machinations brought only hardship to her kingdom. Later in her reign, Joanna became entangled in the Western Schism, supporting the anti-pope Clement VII against Pope Urban VI. This decision proved to be her ultimate downfall. Urban VI, determined to assert his authority, stripped Joanna of her kingdom and bestowed it upon her cousin, Charles of Durazzo. Charles, with Hungarian support, invaded Naples. Joanna, by this point in her 50s, was unable to mount an effective defense. She was captured in 1382 and held prisoner. On May 12, 1382, Joanna I met her end. She was smothered to death on the orders of Charles of Durazzo, a chilling echo of her first husband's murder. Her death, mirroring the alleged circumstances of Anju's, was interpreted by many as divine retribution, a final judgment for the sin she was believed to have committed decades earlier. Even after her death, her legacy remained, stained by the accusations of regicide and the tumultuous violent nature of her reign. She was remembered by many as a queen whose ambition and alleged ruthlessness led to the murder of her husband and brought endless strife to her kingdom, cementing her place as one of the most hated figures of her era. Her story served as a cautionary tale of female power, gone awry, forever linked to the image of a queen who orchestrated the death of her own king. Number 3. Isabella of France. In the early 14th century, the court of England watched as a new queen arrived, bringing with her the prestige of French royalty. Isabella of France, daughter of the powerful French king Philip IV, married Edward II of England in 1308. Initially, she was seen as a beautiful and promising consort, a symbol of alliance between two great kingdoms. However, her life would descend into a bitter struggle for power, betrayal, and eventually the deposition and alleged murder of her own husband, earning her the infamous moniker She-Wolf of France, and a place among the most hated queens of the Middle Ages. The seeds of Isabella's hatred for her husband, and consequently the public's hatred for her, were sown early in their marriage. Edward II, unlike his formidable father Edward I, was perceived as a weak and indecisive king, deeply infatuated with male favorites. His intense relationship with Piers Gaveston, a Gascon knight, alienated the English nobility and pushed Isabella to the periphery of the court. Gaveston, showered with royal favor and titles, openly disrespected the queen, allegedly calling her a fine sow. This public humiliation and Edward's disregard for his royal duties and his wife's dignity deeply wounded Isabella and contributed to a growing resentment. After Gaveston's execution by the exasperated barons, Edward found a new favorite, Hugh Despenser, the younger, and his father, Hugh Despenser, the elder. The Despensers' influence over the king became even more absolute than Gaveston's. They accumulated vast wealth, seized lands, and brutally suppressed any opposition, including members of the royal family. Isabella, who was initially tolerant, found herself increasingly mortalized and abused. The Despensers allegedly denied her access to her children, confiscated her lands, and even reduced her household, effectively treating her as a prisoner within her own court. Chroniclers reported that Isabella was left in financial distress, forcing her to borrow money from foreign merchants. This level of disrespect towards the queen was unprecedented and shocking to many. By 1325, Isabella's patience had run out. Seeing no recourse within England, she seized an opportunity to escape the oppressive court. She traveled to France, ostensibly to negotiate a peace treaty between England and France regarding Gascony, but secretly with a far grander plan. In France, she refused to return to Edward, publicly declaring that she would not live with her husband as long as the Despensers remained in power. This public defiance of her husband, a king, was a bold and scandalous move that shocked royal courts across Europe. In Paris, Isabella formed a scandalous alliance that sealed her fate in the annals of infamy. She openly took Roger Mortimer, an exiled English baron who was a bitter enemy of the Despensers, as her lover. Their affair was not discreet. It was a brazen act of defiance against Edward and a direct challenge to his authority. This open adultery by a queen was considered a grave sin and a profound dishonor, eroding her reputation and solidifying the perception of her as a morally corrupt figure. The relationship provided Edward and the Despensers with ample ammunition to brand her as a traitor and a harlot. With Mortimer's help, and bolstered by French support and funds, Isabella launched an invasion of England in 1326. Her forces quickly gained momentum, as many English nobles and even some of Edward's own loyalists, disgusted by the Despensers' tyranny, flocked to her banner. The invasion was remarkably successful, and Edward II and the Despensers found themselves abandoned and isolated. The Despensers were swiftly captured and executed with brutal public displays, satisfying the vengeful mood of the populace, and the Queen's capture of King Edward II presented Isabella and Mortimer with a dilemma. King could not simply be divorced or imprisoned indefinitely without risking a counter-revolt. In 1327, Isabella orchestrated Edward's deposition. Parliament was summoned, and under duress and widespread popular discontent, declared Edward unfit to rule. His young son Edward III was crowned king, with Isabella and Mortimer acting as regents. This act of deposing an anointed king, even one as unpopular as Edward II, was a shocking and unprecedented event in English history, and Isabella's central role in it marked her as a ruthless and dangerous woman in the eyes of many. Isabella and Mortimer's rule quickly became as avaricious and oppressive as the Despensers. Mortimer, in particular, accumulated vast wealth and power, often at the expense of the realm. Their relationship, still public and scandalous, contributed to a growing resentment among the English people who had initially welcomed Isabella as a liberator. There were whispers that the new regents were merely replacing one set of tyrants with another. The queen, who had promised to restore order, was now seen as complicit in the new regime's abuses. The ultimate act that solidified Isabella's hated image was the widespread belief that she ordered the murder of her deposed husband. While the exact circumstances of Edward II's death in Berkeley Castle in September 1327 remain debated, chroniclers of the time widely reported that he was subjected to a particular brutal and humiliation, that he was subjected to a portance. This method, supposedly designed to conceal the crime while sending a clear message, was attributed to Isabella and Mortimer. The sheer cruelty of the alleged act directed against an anointed king, even a deposed one, horrified contemporaries and cemented Isabella's reputation as a monstrous figure, a she-wolf indeed, capable of unimaginable atrocities for power. Within a few years, young Edward III, now coming of age, resented the tyrannical grip of his mother and Mortimer. In 1330, he staged a coup arresting Mortimer and effectively ending Isabella's regency. Mortimer was executed for treason, and Isabella was sent into a comfortable but enforced retirement at Castle Rising. She lived for many more years, largely out of political life, but the memory of her actions, her affair, her deposition of her husband, and his alleged murder ensured that she would be remembered as one of England's most infamous and hated queens. Her story was a chilling example of a queen who defied all conventions, seized power with brutal efficiency, and paid the price in public opprobrium that endured for centuries. Number 4. Melisendi of Jerusalem. In the early 12th century, the Crusader kingdom of Jerusalem, a fragile Christian outpost in the Levant, was ruled by a remarkable woman whose ambition and fierce determination to protect her inherited power brought her into direct conflict. Melisendi, born around 1105, was the eldest daughter of King Baldwin II of Jerusalem. As the kingdom lacked male heirs, Baldwin took the unprecedented step of declaring Melisendi his direct successor, not just a consort. This decision, revolutionary for its time, ensured her unique position, but also laid the foundation for decades of struggle and the resentment of those who believed women should not wield ultimate authority. Melisendi's early life was marked by careful preparation for rule. Her father ensured she was well educated and involved in matters of state. In 1129, she married Fulk V of Anjou, a powerful French count who was expected to rule alongside her. However, from the outset, Fulk sought to sideline Melisendi and rule Jerusalem as king in his own right, often neglecting her role and denying her access to the levers of power. This blatant attempt to usurp her inherited rights immediately created tension within the royal court and among the nobility who supported Melisendi's claim. The chronicler, William of Tyre, writing later, subtly implied that Melisendi engaged in an affair with Hugh II of Le Pouzet, the powerful Count of Jaffa. While concrete evidence for this accusation is scarce and likely politically motivated, the rumors spread throughout the kingdom, further damaging Melisendi's reputation. Fulk, whether truly believing the rumors or using them as a pretext, tried to discredit Melisendi and assert his sole authority. This conflict culminated in a period of intense court intrigue and even open rebellion by nobles who sided with Melisendi against Fulk's perceived tyranny. The widespread suspicion surrounding her alleged infidelity, even if unfounded, was a powerful tool for her enemies to portray her as an immoral and untrustworthy woman. Melisendi, however, was not one to yield. She rallied her supporters, including prominent members of the clergy and many of the older nobility who remembered her father. She successfully asserted her rights, and by 1134 Fulk was compelled to acknowledge her as co-ruler. Royal charters of this period show both their names appearing together, a testament to her tenacity. This early victory established her as a formidable force, but it also sowed the seeds of resentment among those who believed a woman should not overtly challenge her husband, let alone claim equal or even superior. Her refusal to step aside when expected and her successful defiance of her husband was seen by some as a dangerous and unwomanly precedent. Upon Fulk's accidental death in 1143, Melisendi became the sole regent for her young son, Baldwin III. This was her moment of undisputed power, and she embraced it fully. She ruled with competence and energy, overseeing significant construction projects, issuing decrees, and engaging in diplomacy. She appointed her own officials and effectively managed the kingdom's affairs, demonstrating her capacity for leadership. However, as Baldwin III grew older, reaching his majority in 1152, he began to resent his mother's continued dominance. This created a severe rift within the royal family, escalating into a bitter power struggle between mother and son. Baldwin III, urged on by factions of the nobility who preferred a male ruler and perhaps resented Melisendi's continued control, demanded full authority. Melisenda, deeply invested in her power and believing her son was not yet ready to rule independently, refused to relinquish control. This unprecedented public conflict between a reigning queen and her adult son tore the kingdom apart. The Patriarch of Jerusalem and other influential figures sided with Baldwin III, further isolating Melisenda. The kingdom split into two factions, and civil war threatened. In a dramatic act of defiance, Baldwin marched on Jerusalem, forcing Melisenda to take refuge in the Tower of David. The ensuing siege was a stark illustration of the depth of hatred and resentment directed at Melisendi's continued exercise of power. That a son would wage war against his own mother for the throne, and that many would support him, speaks volumes about the discomfort and animosity her strong rule generated. Ultimately, a compromise was brokered. Baldwin would rule the northern territories, including the capital city of Jerusalem, while Melisende would retain control of the southern regions, including Nablus and the wealthy port of Acre. While a temporary peace was achieved, the event deeply damaged Melisendi's image. She was seen as an overly ambitious mother who clung to power even at the expense of her own son and the stability of the kingdom. Her determination, once admired by her supporters, was now twisted into obstinacy and a refusal to yield to the natural order of male succession. Public humiliation of being besieged by her own son was a profound blow to her prestige and a clear sign of the hatred she had accumulated. Even after relinquishing some power, Melisenda remained an influential figure, continuing to advise her son and maintain a degree of authority until her death in 1161. However, the legacy of her conflicts, particularly the accusation of infidelity and her unprecedented struggle for power against her husband and then her son, ensured her place in the memory of the Crusader states. As a queen who defied expectations and consequently drew the ire and hatred, her story was a potent reminder of the dangers of female ambition in a world unwilling to accept it. Number 5. Eleanor of Aquitaine. Eleanor of Aquitaine, born around 1122, is often celebrated as one of the most powerful and influential women of the Middle Ages. Her life was a saga of 2 royal marriages, a crusade, and a long period of imprisonment. While her strength and political acumen are undeniable, her actions and personality also earned her significant hatred, particularly from powerful men who found her independence. Her defiance of conventions and her willingness to pursue her own interests made her a figure of both admiration and intense animosity. Eleanor's first marriage at the age of 15 was to Louis VII, the King of France. As Duchess of Aquitaine, she brought with her vast and wealthy territories, making her a formidable partner. However, the marriage was famously tempestuous. Louis, known for his piety and monastic leanings, was a poor match for the vivacious, intelligent, and politically astute Eleanor. Her independent spirit and love for the courtly culture of Aquitaine clashed with his reserved and devout nature. Chroniclers hinted at her frivolous behavior and her alleged indiscretions during the Second Crusade, particularly with her uncle Raymond of Antioch. Whether these accusations were true or simply attempts to discredit her, they certainly damaged her reputation in the eyes of the pious and those who sought to undermine her influence. Turning point came when Eleanor, after producing 2 daughters but no male heir for Louis, sought an annulment. The official grounds were consanguinity, but the real reason was their fundamental incompatibility and Eleanor's desire to escape a marriage that stifled her. The annulment was granted in 1152. This act, itself a queen, initiating a divorce from an anointed king, was highly scandalous and unprecedented. It demonstrated Eleanor's audacious nature and her willingness to defy traditional expectations, immediately drawing criticism and resentment from those who viewed her as arrogant and disrespectful to her husband and the Church. Just 8 weeks after her annulment, Eleanor married Henry Plantagenet, Duke of Normandy and Count of Anjou, who was a decade her junior. This whirlwind second marriage was an audacious political move. Henry was a rising power, and the union of Aquitaine with his vast continental possessions created a formidable new realm, one that significantly overshadowed the King of France. This immediately made Eleanor a hated figure in the French court, seen as a traitor, who had stripped France of valuable territories and empowered its chief rival. The political consequences of her marriage choices alienated an entire kingdom. Upon Henry's ascension to the English throne as Henry II in 1154, Eleanor became Queen of England. For years she was a dynamic and influential queen, ruling her own lands in Aquitaine and participating in Henry's court. However, her powerful personality and Henry's increasing infidelities, including his infamous affair with Rosamund Clifford, led to a severe deterioration of their relationship. Eleanor, never one to tolerate slights or surrender her agency, began to actively resist Henry's control. The pinnacle of the hatred Eleanor incurred from her husband and his supporters came in 1173 when she openly supported and encouraged her sons' rebellion against their father. Their 3 surviving sons, Henry the young king, Richard and Geoffrey, launched a major revolt against Henry II, demanding greater authority and lands. Eleanor, from her court in Poitiers, actively participated in the rebellion, providing political and financial support, and even attempting to flee to France, disguised as a man, a detail that further cemented her image as a defiant and rebellious woman. This act of directly encouraging her sons to wage war against their own father, the king was seen as a monstrous betrayal and an unforgivable act of disloyalty. The Great Revolt of 1173 to 1174 was a massive challenge to Henry II's authority, and Eleanor was widely blamed for fueling it. Henry, once he suppressed the rebellion, reacted with extreme vengeance against Eleanor. He had her captured and imprisoned first in various castles on the continent and then in England for the next 15 years. This long period of imprisonment, though often glossed over in romantic retellings of her life, was a stark testament to the depth of Henry's hatred and his determination. She was kept under close watch, denied political influence, and separated from her children. A brutal punishment for her rebellion. The fact that a powerful king would take such extreme measures against his own queen demonstrated the level of threat she posed and the animosity she inspired. Even after Henry II's death and her release by her favorite son, Richard the Lionheart, Eleanor's reputation remained complex. While she enjoyed a period of great influence and power during Richard's reign, and later during John's, her past actions, particularly her role in the rebellion against Henry II, were not forgotten. She was remembered by many as a powerful but dangerous woman, one who prioritized her own desires and the interests of her Aquitanian lands over loyalty to her husband and the stability of the English kingdom. Her refusal to conform to the subservient role of a medieval queen and her willingness to fight for her own power and principles, even against her own family, made her a figure who both commanded respect and inspired profound hatred in her own time. She was seen as a woman who broke the mold, and for that she often paid a heavy price in public opinion. Number 6. Empress Matilda. In the turbulent 12th century, a woman of extraordinary lineage and ambition found herself at the heart of a devastating civil war, earning the bitter hatred of many of her subjects and rivals. Empress Matilda, born in 1102, was the daughter of King Henry I of England and the granddaughter of William the Conqueror. Her early life was spent far from England. She was married to the Holy Roman Emperor Henry V, gaining the prestigious title of Empress. However, fate, or perhaps Henry I's desperate desire for a male heir, would soon thrust her into a fierce and unpopular struggle for the English throne. Upon the death of Emperor Henry V, Matilda returned to England and was unexpectedly declared her father's heir. Henry I, having lost his only legitimate son, William Alan, in the White Ship disaster, took the unprecedented step of making his daughter swear oaths to recognize Matilda as the rightful successor. This declaration, though sworn to by the English barons, flew in the face of centuries of tradition. English law and customs strongly favored male succession, and the idea of a woman ruling in her own right was deeply unsettling to many of the powerful nobles and the clergy. This immediately created a fertile ground for dissent and resentment. When Henry I died in 1135, the oaths were quickly disregarded. Her cousin, Stephen of Blois, a grandson of William the Conqueror, through a female line swiftly crossed the Channel and seized the throne, claiming it by popular acclamation and presenting himself as a more suitable masculine refused to accept it. This refusal ignited a brutal and protracted conflict known as the Anarchy, a period of devastating civil war that lasted for nearly 2 decades. The hatred directed at Matilda stemmed largely from her stubborn insistence on her claim and the profound suffering the war inflicted upon the kingdom. Matilda's attempts to gain the throne were hampered by several factors that cemented public opinion against her. Firstly, her personality was often described as arrogant, haughty, and demanding. Chroniclers reported that she lacked the affability and diplomatic skills necessary to win over the powerful and often fickle English nobility. When she finally gained a foothold in England, winning a series of battles and even capturing Stephen in 1141, she entered London expecting to be crowned. However, her imperious manner and her refusal to compromise or grant concessions to the city's powerful citizens quickly alienated them. The citizens of London, who had initially been prepared to welcome her, were shocked by her harshness. She demanded heavy taxes, dismissed their petitions for liberties, and refused to listen to their pleas. Her inflexibility stood in stark contrast to Stephen's more accessible, though often ineffective, style. Chronicler William of Malmesbury, while generally sympathetic to her cause, noted that her haughty spirit and inflexible obstinacy caused her to lose the support of the very people who had initially been willing to embrace her. This perceived arrogance, especially from a woman, was seen as a profound flaw and a reason to despise her. Her brief moment of triumph in London quickly turned into disaster. The citizens, alienated by her demeanor, rose up against her, forcing her to flee the city in a desperate scramble, allegedly dressed as a nun. This humiliating retreat further underscored her unpopularity and fueled the narrative that she was unfit to rule. Her supporters, disheartened by her failures, began to defect. The image of a proud woman driven from her own capital by angry commoners deeply damaged her credibility and solidified the perception that she was a tyrant in the making, not a rightful queen. Moreover, Matilda's foreign upbringing and her association with the Holy Roman Empire, a distant and somewhat feared power, made her seem less English and more alien to many. Her second marriage to Geoffrey Plantagenet, Count of Anjou, further complicated matters. The Angevins were traditional enemies of the Normans who formed the core of the English aristocracy. This alliance, while strategically sound for her claim, alienated many of the powerful Anglo-Norman barons and solidified the image of her bringing a foreign dynasty to England. Constant warfare of the anarchy, fueled by Matilda's relentless pursuit of the throne, brought immense suffering to England. The land was ravaged by raiding armies, castles were built and destroyed, and law and order collapsed. People endured famine, banditry, and widespread destruction. Though Stephen was equally responsible for the war, the narrative often placed the blame squarely on Matilda's unyielding ambition to claim a throne that many believed was not rightfully hers. She was seen as the instigator of endless strife, a woman whose personal quest for power plunged an entire nation into misery. Matilda's efforts never culminated in a coronation. She remained Lady of the English rather than Queen by 1148, facing dwindling support and realizing the futility of continued direct military action. She withdrew to Normandy. The eventual resolution of the anarchy came through a compromise in 1153, where Stephen recognized Matilda's son, Henry Plantagenet, as his successor, thus establishing the Plantagenet dynasty. While Matilda eventually saw her son crowned as Henry II, her own lifetime was marked by constant struggle, public rejection, and the deep hatred she earned for her perceived arrogance, her stubborn refusal to yield, and the immense suffering her pursuit of the throne inflicted upon England. She was remembered not as a rightful queen, but as a catalyst for a devastating civil war, a woman whose iron will brought only destruction. Number 7. Brunhilda of Austrasia. In the violent and treacherous world of early medieval Frankish Gaul, during the 6th and early 7th centuries, few figures were as reviled and as ruthless as Queen Brunhilda of Austrasia. Born a Visigothic princess around 534 AD, she married Sigebert I, the Merovingian king of Austrasia. Her extraordinary intelligence, political astuteness, and unyielding will allowed her to wield immense power, but her long reign was also marked by relentless feuds, assassinations, and a reputation for unparalleled cruelty, making her one of the most hated figures of her age. Brunhilda's troubles, and the source of much of the hatred directed at her, began almost immediately with her marriage. Her sister Galswintha married Sigebert's brother, Chilperic, the first of Neustria. However, Chilperic soon abandoned and then murdered Galswintha, allegedly at the instigation of his mistress Fredigand, who would become his queen. This act of violence ignited a blood feud that would consume the Merovingian kingdoms for decades. Brunhilda, consumed by grief and a thirst for vengeance for her murdered sister, made it her life's mission to destroy Fredigand and Chilperic. This personal vendetta, pursued with relentless determination, became a central theme of her reign, contributing to widespread instability and earning her a fearsome reputation. Brunhilda's pursuit of revenge was not merely personal. It was also a struggle for power and territory between the rival Frankish kingdoms of Austrasia and Neustria. After Sigebert I was assassinated, a murder almost certainly orchestrated by Fredigand, Brunhilda found herself a widow in a perilous position. However, she quickly asserted her authority, initially as regent for her young son Childebert II, and later for her grandsons and even great-grandson. She effectively ruled Austrasia for nearly 50 years, a feat almost unheard of for a woman in that era. This longevity of power, achieved through cunning and often brutal means, made her a target of intense animosity from powerful nobles who resented her influence and believed a woman should not hold such sway. The Frankish chronicles, particularly the writings of Gregory of Tours, depict Brunhilda as a formidable but also tyrannical figure. She was accused of immense avarice, seizing lands and wealth from the nobility and the church. She was described as exceptionally cruel to those who opposed her, and chroniclers detailed a long list of her enemies and rivals who met untimely ends, often through assassination or judicial murder. Bishops, dukes, and powerful landowners who challenged her authority or simply crossed her were systematically eliminated. These accusations, whether entirely accurate or exaggerated by her enemies, painted a terrifying picture of a queen who ruled through fear and bloodshed. Her methods were often seen as unchristian and tyrannical. Chroniclers accused her of attempting to impose direct rule, circumventing the traditional power of the Frankish nobility and the assemblies. She sought to strengthen the royal authority and centralize power, which was deeply resented by the fiercely independent Frankish magnates. Her attempts to govern directly and her relentless suppression of aristocratic power were seen as a tyrannical abuse of her position. They believed she was usurping male authority and acting outside the natural order. Brunhilda's relationship with the church was also fraught. While she sometimes supported religious foundations, she also came into direct conflict with powerful bishops who dared to criticize her actions or her lifestyle. She famously clashed with Columbanus, an Irish missionary who condemned her immoral conduct and her use of royal children. In political maneuvers, her refusal to submit to moral or spiritual guidance from the church further solidified her image as a defiant and ruthless ruler, one who placed her own power above divine law. The hatred for Brunhilda culminated in her horrific death in 613 AD. After decades of ruling through successive regencies, she faced a rebellion led by King Clothar II of Neustria, Fredigand's son. Clothar, with the support of powerful Austrasian nobles who had long resented Brunhilda's rule, captured her. Chroniclers describe her torture and death in gruesome detail. She was reportedly subjected to 3 days of torment before being tied to the tail of a wild horse and dragged to her death. This brutal end, orchestrated by her enemies, was not just a punishment. It was a public spectacle of vengeance, a final, definitive statement of the hatred she had accumulated during her long and bloody reign. The accounts of her death, often exaggerated and embellished, served to solidify her reputation as one of the most evil and hated queens in history. She was depicted as the epitome of female tyranny, a woman whose ambition and vengeance knew no bounds. Her story served as a cautionary tale for centuries, a chilling example of a queen who defied all expectations, clung to power with a ferocity that terrified her enemies, and ultimately met a brutal end at the hands of those who despised her most. Her name became synonymous with cruelty and ruthless ambition, a queen who left a trail of blood and resentment across the early medieval landscape. Number 8. Fredigand. In the shadowy, brutal landscape of 6th century Merovingian Gaul, few names evoke as much chilling infamy as Fredigand. Born into humble origins, possibly as a servant, she rose to become the Queen of Chilperic, the first of Neustria. Her story is a dark chronicle of ambition, manipulation, and an unparalleled ruthlessness that earned her a reputation as one of the most hated and feared women of the early Middle Ages. Her life was a relentless pursuit of power, marked by a series of shocking murders and a bitter generations-long feud with her rival Brunhilda of Austrasia. Fredigand's ascent to power began as a concubine of Chilperic I. She ruthlessly manipulated her way into his affections, sidelining his first wife Autovera. But her true ascent to queenly power began with the arrival of Chilperic's second wife, Galswintha, a Visigothic princess and the sister of Brunhilda. Galswintha brought a substantial dowry, but Fredigand, unwilling to share Chilperic's affections or her growing influence, quickly moved against her. Sometime in 568 AD, Galswintha was found strangled in her bed. The suspicion immediately fell upon Fredigand and Chilperic. This brazen murder, directed at a royal consort, was a horrifying act that cemented Fredigand's image as a heartless killer and ignited the long and bloody feud with Brunhilda. With Galswintha eliminated, Fredigand quickly became Chilperic's queen. Her ambition, however, did not stop there. She systematically sought to remove any obstacles to her power and her children's succession. Chilperic had sons from his first marriage, and Fredigand, determined to secure her own son's place on the throne, allegedly orchestrated the deaths of 3 of them. These were not open battles, but quiet eliminations, through mysterious illnesses or assassinations, acts that sent shivers of fear through the Frankish court and further cemented her reputation for cold-blooded treachery. Contemporary chroniclers, especially Gregory of Tours, detail these murders with a mix of horror and condemnation, painting Fredigand as a demonic figure. Her rivalry with Brunhilda was the defining feature of her life and contributed immensely to the hatred she faced. This was a feud not just between 2 women, but between 2 kingdoms, Neustria and Austrasia, and 2 powerful, vengeful personalities. Fredigand relentlessly pursued the assassination of King Sigebert, the first of Austrasia. Brunhilda's husband, in 575 AD. She allegedly sent assassins disguised as servants who stabbed Sigebert with poisoned daggers. This brazen act of regicide, motivated by both personal hatred and political ambition, shocked the Frankish world and further solidified Fredigand's infamy. Even after Sigebert's death, Fredigand continued to pursue Brunhilda and her children with relentless vigor. She attempted to assassinate Brunhilda herself on multiple occasions, using poison and hired killers. One famous account describes her attempting to poison Brunhilda by sending a disguised assassin with a poisoned dagger, only for the plot to be discovered. Her willingness to employ any means, however ruthless, to eliminate her enemies, including her own family members and rival queens, created a pervasive atmosphere of terror and made her one of the most feared and hated figures in the Frankish kingdoms. She was known for her capricious nature and her willingness to inflict severe punishment on those who displeased her, even her own servants. Gregory of Tours recounts tales of her having servants tortured and even murdered for minor transgressions, such as failing to wake her early enough or neglecting her horses. These stories, whether entirely accurate or exaggerated, certainly circulated widely and contributed to the public perception of her as a cruel and tyrannical mistress, a queen who wielded absolute power with terrifying caprice. She allegedly even plotted against her own daughter Reganth for financial reasons, trying to get her murdered and robbed. This accusation, though unproven, reflects the deep-seated belief among her contemporaries that Fredigand would stop at nothing, not even infanticide, to achieve her goals. Her willingness to disregard all familial and moral bonds for the sake of power was seen as utterly reprehensible. Throughout her life, Fredigand was a master of political maneuvering. She survived numerous rebellions, maintained her hold on Chilperic, and after his death in 584 AD, another death shrouded in suspicion, though not directly attributed to her. She served as regent for her young son, Clothar II. During her regency, she continued to battle against Brunhilda and solidify her son's claim to the throne, demonstrating her unyielding will and political acumen. Her ability to survive and thrive in such a dangerous political environment, while systematically eliminating her enemies, further solidified her image as a formidable and terrifying figure. Fredigand died in 597 AD, having outlived her fierce rival Brunhilda in a way. Her death brought little remorse from those who knew her story. She was remembered by contemporary chroniclers and later generations as the embodiment of evil in a queen, a serial killer, a ruthless manipulator, and a vengeful spirit who plunged the Frankish kingdoms into decades of internecine warfare and bloodshed. Her legacy was not one of statesmanship or justice, but of unbridled ambition and the blood-soaked pursuit of power, making her unequivocally one of the most hated and infamous queens of the entire medieval period.